Rain sliced across the windshield in thin silver blades, each drop catching the highway lights and shattering them into streaks of red and blue. Interstate 95 lay ahead like a ribbon of wet glass, humming under the tires of a rented Lincoln Navigator that moved with patient, deliberate calm. Inside the cabin, the air smelled faintly of leather and clean rain. Barrett C. Kingsley adjusted the rearview mirror with steady fingers. His charcoal suit jacket rested, folded on the passenger seat, the fabric dark and expensive even in the dim light. His white shirt sleeves were crisp, cuffs aligned. He checked the speedometer, 54 in a 55. The road was nearly empty. A tractor-trailer drifted far ahead, taillights glowing like distant embers. Barrett exhaled slowly, a quiet breath that barely disturbed the soft hum of the climate control. It had been a long meeting in Richmond. Too many charts. Too many careful promises. He wanted silence. He wanted sleep. The mirror behind him exploded. Blue and red strobes tore through the darkness, filling the cabin with violent color. The light pulsed against the wet asphalt, against the back of his eyes. Barrett did not flinch. He eased his foot off the accelerator. The Lincoln glided toward the shoulder, turn signal blinking in patient orange rhythm. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as he stopped beneath a lonely highway lamp that flickered against the drizzle. He shut off the engine. The world shrank to rain, tapping metal and the distant growl of passing traffic. His hands moved to the wheel. 10 and 2. He lowered the window halfway. Cool, damp air slipped inside, carrying the metallic scent of wet road and oil. In the side mirror, he watched them approach. One officer stayed back near the cruiser's bumper, stance wide, hand resting on his holster. The other walked forward with a loose, almost swaggering stride. A flashlight beam cut through the rain, slicing across the Navigator's grill, then climbing the hood, then stabbing through the window directly into Barrett's face. License and registration. The voice was flat, bored, but something sharp lived beneath it. Barrett turned his head slowly, careful not to move his hands. The officer was young, maybe mid-20s, buzz-cut, amber shooting glasses that glowed strangely under the streetlight. The nameplate read, Vance. "Officer," Barrett said, his voice deep and even, "my wallet is in my suit jacket on the passenger seat. Registration is in the glove compartment. I am going to reach for them. Don't get comfortable." The flashlight beam tightened, blinding. "Step out of the vehicle." Barrett paused. Rain ticked against the roof in a steady rhythm. "Officer, I have not committed a traffic violation. Is there a reason you are asking me to exit the vehicle?" "I smell alcohol." The lie hung in the air like exhaust. Barrett's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I have not had a drink in 12 years. If you would like to administer a breath test." I said, "Get out of the car." Vance's hand shot to the door handle. He yanked it open, rain blowing in across the leather seat. "Now stop resisting." There was no resistance. Barrett unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped out into the rain. He rose to his full height, tall and broad-shouldered, water soaking into the white cotton at his collar. He did not loom. He did not square up. His posture remained neutral, palms visible. The second officer moved in. Older, thick mustache, sergeant stripes on his sleeve. The name Ronan glinted under the lamp. Ronan looked at the Navigator with open appraisal. "Nice ride," he said, sneering. "Rental?" "Yes." "Who rented it for you?" Ronan's eyes narrowed. "The dealer you work for?" A low, wet chuckle. Barrett met his gaze. Rain slid down his temple, cool and steady. "I rented it myself, Sergeant. My identification is in my jacket." "Turn around," Vance barked. The young officer spun him abruptly, pressing him against the cold, rain-slick metal of the Lincoln. The impact thudded through his ribs. "Hands behind your back." Steel circled his wrists with a sharp, final click. "You are making a mistake," Barrett said quietly. "My credentials are in that jacket. If you look at them, we can resolve this." "We know who you are," Vance said, tightening the cuffs until they bit into skin. "You're just another statistic." Ronan stepped closer, breath thick with stale coffee and wintergreen. "Kingsley, huh?" he said, reading from the air as if tasting the name. "Like the president?" "Yeah," Vance added with a laugh. "And I'm Abraham Lincoln." Rainwater streamed down Barrett's face, into his collar. He felt the cold of the metal cuffs, the weight of their assumption. "Run the plates," he said evenly. Run the name Barrett C. Kingsley. Ronan's grin widened. Get him in the back, he said. Let's see how much cash he's carrying. They shoved him toward the cruiser. The back door opened with a hollow creak. Hard plastic. Caged interior. The smell of old sweat and disinfectant. Barrett ducked his head and slid onto the narrow seat. The door slammed shut, sealing him behind reinforced glass. From inside, he watched them through the rain-streaked window as they searched the Lincoln. Ronan lifted the suit jacket, fingers digging into the inner pocket. A slim leather wallet appeared in his hand. Barrett's eyes did not blink. He saw the sergeant open it. He saw him thumb past the bills. He saw him pause at the badge flap. For a fraction of a second, Ronan went still. Then he laughed. He snapped the wallet closed and tossed it onto the dashboard of the patrol car as he climbed in. What is it, Sarge? Vance asked, sliding behind the wheel. Fake ID, Ronan said, grinning into the rearview mirror at the man in cuffs. Says he's with the feds. Director, it says. Vance roared with laughter and slapped the steering wheel. Director, sure. Barrett sat in the darkness of the back seat, rain blurring the world outside. They did not know. They had just arrested the man who signed the paychecks of the agents who investigated police departments for exactly this kind of behavior. The cruiser pulled away from the shoulder, leaving the Lincoln abandoned beneath the flickering lamp. In the back seat, Barrett closed his eyes for one measured breath. Then, he began to memorize. Car number 402. Time 11:14 p.m. Mile marker 88. Name's Vance. Ronan. The rain kept falling. The machine had just started moving. The cruiser's suspension groaned as it picked up speed, tires hissing over wet pavement. Blue and red lights continued to pulse against the highway barriers, washing the inside of the vehicle in restless color. In the caged back seat, Barrett adjusted his wrists slightly, testing the tension of the cuffs without appearing to move. The metal was tight, deliberately so. Water streaked across the rear window, distorting the abandoned Lincoln into a smear of shadow beneath the lone highway lamp. Then it vanished behind a curve. Up front, Vance drove one-handed, elbow hooked over the steering wheel. Ronan leaned back in the passenger seat, Barrett's wallet resting near the radio console like a trophy. Director, Vance muttered, snorting. Guy watches too many movies. Ronan flipped the wallet open again, this time slower. The cabin light flicked on, pale and yellow. The gold badge caught it immediately. The holographic seal shifted under the glow, green to amber, a faint ripple like oil on water. Ronan tilted it once, twice. The tiny embedded threads shimmered, then settled. He smirked. Good fake, he said. Spent some money on this one. Barrett watched through the mesh divider, eyes steady, expression unreadable. He saw the moment clearly, the crossroads where recognition could have lived. The hologram, the raised seal, the federal numbering format. Ronan chose ego instead. He slid 2 folded bills from the wallet crisp, marked, pre-recorded earlier that evening in a secure office miles away, and tucked them into his own pocket with practiced ease. The rest he dropped back into the leather fold. Book him as John Doe, Ronan said. Refused breathalyzer. Suspicion of narcotics. Will impound the SUV. Tow company'll love that, Vance replied. Fletcher always does. The cruiser's radio crackled faintly, then fell silent again. Rain softened to a mist as they exited the interstate and rolled through the manicured streets of Oak Creek, subdivisions with identical mailboxes, porch lights glowing warm behind trimmed hedges. The illusion of safety. Barrett shifted slightly against the hard plastic seat. His shoulder brushed cold vinyl. He inhaled once, catching the layered scents of damp fabric, gun oil, and stale coffee embedded in the cruiser's interior. They thought this was routine. They did not know the man in the back seat was the newly appointed director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, traveling without escort, conducting a quiet field assessment of interstate task force integrity. They did not know this stop had just activated a test they would fail in less than 12 hours. The cruiser turned into a narrow municipal lot. A squat concrete building loomed ahead, windows lit in tired fluorescent white. The Oak Creek Police Department. The engine cut. Silence pressed in. Vance stepped out first, rain speckling his uniform. He opened the rear door with exaggerated force. Out. Barrett slid his feet onto the wet asphalt. Gravel crunched beneath polished shoes now darkened by rain. He rose without hesitation. Inside, the precinct smelled of floor wax, old paperwork, and something faintly sour beneath it all. The bullpen stretched ahead desks, cluttered with reports, computer monitors casting bluish light onto bored faces. "Look what we caught," Vance called out. 3 officers glanced up. One leaned back in his chair. Another smirked without lifting his pen. "Director of the FBI," Ronan announced, tossing the wallet onto the booking counter. A ripple of laughter followed. Not loud, not surprised, just familiar. Officer Caldwell sat at the terminal, gum snapping softly between her teeth. She didn't look up. "Name," she said. "Barrett C. Kingsley," Barrett replied clearly. "I am requesting my one phone call. I need to contact the Department of Justice." Vance leaned close to his ear. "You don't get to request anything." "Refused breathalyzer," Ronan added. "Put him down as a refusal." Caldwell's fingers moved lazily across the keyboard. The screen reflected in her glasses. "System temporarily unavailable for verification." She shrugged, Con. "Name John Doe. We'll ID him later." "My name is not John Doe," Barrett said. Vance shoved him forward half a step. "It is until we say it isn't." A printer hummed nearby. Paper slid out with a soft mechanical sigh. "Strip search," Ronan said, already turning away. The room didn't react. No hesitation. No paperwork exchanged to justify it. Just routine. Barrett felt the shift. The quiet choreography of abuse dressed as procedure. In the narrow, tiled room at the back, the fluorescent light flickered overhead. Water dripped somewhere unseen. Vance stood by the door, arms crossed, watching. "Remove everything." Fabric slid against skin. Shoes hit tile. The air felt colder without the suit, without the armor of normalcy. Vance made a low comment under his breath, something about expensive tailoring and cheap lies. He checked seams, pockets, waistband. The search lingered longer than necessary. Barrett focused on breathing, on cataloging, on remaining a witness. When it was over, they tossed him an orange jumpsuit 2 sizes too small. The cotton scratched at his shoulders as he pulled it on. The pants rode high at his calves. "Fashion week in the cell block," Vance said. They walked him down a corridor that smelled of disinfectant layered over urine. Holding cell number 4 waited behind thick bars. 3 men inside looked up as the door opened. 1 young and shaking, 2 older, eyes dulled by repetition. The door clanged shut. Outside, Ronan's voice drifted faintly through the hallway. "Every Tuesday and Friday," he muttered to someone unseen. "Quota nights." Inside the cell, Barrett sat slowly on the wooden bench. The concrete wall behind him held carved initials and a scratched phrase barely visible in the dim light. "God help us." One of the older men studied him. "FBI director, huh?" Barrett met his gaze. "I didn't claim to know one," he said quietly. "I am one." The man barked a short laugh. "Then why you in here?" Barrett looked toward the corridor where keys jingled and laughter echoed. "Research," he said. The young man in the corner trembled harder, arms wrapped tight around himself. The older inmate leaned closer. "They take your cash, book you as nobody. 48 hours later, you lose your job. It's a machine." Barrett listened to the hum of fluorescent lights above them, to the distant murmur of officers moving through their shift. A machine. He rested his cuff, marked wrists on his knees, and closed his eyes for a moment, not in surrender, but in calibration. Machines could be dismantled. Sometimes you just needed a large enough wrench. The holding cell settled into a rhythm of low breathing and distant footsteps. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering just enough to irritate the eyes. The air carried the stale mix of sweat, concrete dust, and institutional cleaner that never quite masked what lay beneath. Barrett sat upright on the wooden bench, orange fabric stretched tight across his shoulders. His wrists still tingled where the cuffs had pressed too hard. Across from him, the older man with the spiderweb tattoo leaned back against the wall, studying him with open curiosity. "You don't smell like the rest of us," the man muttered. Barrett said nothing. A set of boots approached down the corridor. Keys clinked. The slot in the bars slid open with a metallic scrape. "Kingsley," Vance called, voice thick with amusement. "Field trip." Barrett rose smoothly. The door unlocked with a heavy clack. The corridor felt colder than the cell. Vance walked half a step behind him, close enough to bump his shoulder deliberately. They didn't take him to an interview room. They marched him straight back into the bullpen. Several officers were gathered near the booking desk now, coffee cups in hand. A television mounted in the corner played muted late-night news, captions crawling across the screen. "Stand here," Ronan said, positioning Barrett in front of the counter like a display. Officer Caldwell was typing slowly, gums snapping in a steady rhythm. "Strip search complete," Vance announced loudly. "No contraband, just ego." A few chuckles drifted across the room. Barrett looked at the computer monitor, reflected faintly in Caldwell's glasses. Lines of text filled the booking form. Name, John Doe. Charge, obstruction. Refusal, yes. Do I suspicion? Yes. The cursor blinked beside the field marked property. Ronan dropped the leather wallet onto the counter again. It landed with a soft thud. 200 cash, he said casually. Barrett watched carefully. Caldwell did not count it. She did not log serial numbers. She typed a number without lifting her eyes. The printer whirred again. Paper slid out. Chain of custody, Barrett noted silently. Broken at first contact. Fingerprint him, Vance said. They guided Barrett toward a small metal station in the corner. The fingerprint scanner was smudged with oily residue. Vance pressed his fingers down harder than necessary. "Relax," Vance whispered near his ear. "You're not special." The scanner beeped. "Error. System unavailable." Vance laughed. "Guess the system's down again?" Caldwell leaned back in her chair. "Maintenance window. We'll upload later." Later. The word hung in the air like a loophole. Barrett felt the edges of the operation more clearly now. The convenience of outages, the flexibility of names, the absence of verification. A phone rang on a nearby desk. One of the officers answered, speaking in a low voice. The name Fletcher drifted across the room. "Yeah," the officer said. "Late model Lincoln. Clean. You'll want it." Ronan glanced toward Barrett with a small grin. "Tau's already en route," he said. Barrett met his eyes. "You have no legal grounds to seize that vehicle." Ronan's expression hardened slightly. "Suspicion of narcotics gives us probable cause." "Then where is the incident report?" Barrett asked calmly. The ravine quieted for half a second. Ronan stepped closer. "You don't get to cross-examine me." Barrett held his gaze unblinking. "Every action you take is a record, whether you write it down or not." Vance snorted. "Listen to him. Sounds like a lecture." Ronan's jaw tightened. "Put him back." They led Barrett down the corridor again, this time slower. The holding cell door opened and shut with another echoing clang. Inside, the young man in the corner looked up anxiously. "What they do?" Barrett sat back on the bench. "They're building a story," he said quietly. The tattooed man gave a dry laugh. "They always do." Footsteps receded. The bullpen noise faded behind concrete walls. Minutes stretched. Somewhere in the building, a drawer slammed shut. A copier beeped. The television continued its silent crawl. Barrett leaned his head back against the cinder block. He replayed each detail in sequence. Wallet opened, cash pocketed, property mislogged, fingerprints unverified, tow authorized without paperwork, breathalyzer marked as refused without offering one. The machine did not just grind. It relied on indifference. Across from him, the tattooed man spoke again, voice lower now. "Ronan's been doing this years, every Tuesday, every Friday. You're not the first suit he's stripped down." Barrett's eyes opened. "Does he always use the same towing company?" "Fletcher's. They split it. Everybody knows." "Everybody?" Barrett asked. The man shrugged. "Everybody who matters." Silence settled again. Barrett looked at the barred door, at the narrow corridor beyond. He could almost see the root of the paperwork in his mind, the empty fields, the unsigned lines, the altered logs waiting to be corrected later. In a building full of officers, no one had paused. No one had questioned the missing verification. No one had checked the hologram again under proper light. Arrogance had replaced procedure, and arrogance left fingerprints. He flexed his hands slowly, feeling the faint sting where metal had pressed skin. Not anger. Not humiliation. Calibration. The fluorescent lights flickered once more, buzzing louder for a moment before steadying. Across the corridor, laughter rose again. Casual, unguarded, Barrett listened to it fade. Machines ran on repetition, on comfort, on the belief that no one important was watching. He adjusted the orange jumpsuit at his wrists and stared at the door. Someone important was watching, and they had just given him more than enough. The lights dimmed slightly as the night shift settled into its long, indifferent stretch. The corridor outside the holding cells grew quieter, reduced to the occasional scrape of a chair or the distant thud of a locker closing. Inside cell 4, the air thickened. The young man in the corner rocked back and forth, arms wrapped around his knees. His jaw trembled. Sweat beaded along his hairline despite the chill. "They said 48 hours, he whispered. "My boss won't wait 48 hours. No one answered him. The tattooed man leaned forward, forearms resting on his thighs. "They count on that. You lose work, you lose rent, you panic. Then they offer a plea. Fine and go home. Cheaper than fighting." Barrett studied the rusted bolt at the base of the bench. The paint around it had peeled away in rings, revealing bare metal polished by years of restless hands. "How many people pass through here in a week?" he asked. "Depends on the weather," the tattooed man replied. "Rain's good for business. More stops. More probable cause." The word carried a bitterness that lingered. Footsteps approached again, slower this time. Not the heavy stride of Vance, not the confident drag of Ronan. These were measured steps, accompanied by a faint clearing of the throat. A new face appeared beyond the bars. Older than Vance, younger than Ronan, tired eyes. The name Harlan stitched above his pocket. He glanced inside briefly, then at the clipboard in his hand. "You good in there?" he asked without conviction. The tattooed man let out a dry laugh. "Define good." Harlan hesitated, then slid the inspection slot open. His gaze lingered on Barrett. "You the one claiming to be FBI?" Barrett rose from the bench slowly. The jumpsuit rustled softly against concrete. "I didn't claim," he said evenly. "I stated." Harlan shifted his weight. The fluorescent light above him flickered, casting uneven shadows across his face. "They ran your name," Harlan said. "Nothing came up." "Under what name?" Silence. The young man in the corner sniffed quietly, wiping his nose on his sleeve. Harlan looked down at the clipboard again. "Systems down for verification." Barrett stepped closer to the bars. Not threatening, just close enough that his voice didn't need to rise. "When the system comes back up," he said, "ask yourself why it didn't work for me." Harlan's jaw tightened slightly. "You saying it was deliberate?" "I'm saying procedures fail in patterns," Barrett replied. "Not accidents." The hallway fell silent again. Somewhere deeper in the building, a door shut with a hollow echo. Harlan glanced over his shoulder as if expecting someone to appear. "They logged you as John Doe," he said quietly. "I am aware." They marked a breathalyzer refusal. "I was never offered one," Harlan exhaled through his nose. "Not disbelief. Calculation. You're going to court in the morning," he said. "Judge Caldwell moves quick." "So I've heard." Harlan lingered a moment longer. His eyes drifted to Barrett's wrists, faint red impressions still visible. "You want water?" he asked. "Yes." The word was simple. Direct. Harlan disappeared down the corridor. The tattooed man watched him go. "He's not like the others," he muttered. Barrett didn't respond. Minutes later, Harlan returned with a small paper cup. He slid it through the slot carefully. Their fingers brushed for a fraction of a second. Harlan's hand was cold. "You know," Harlan said, keeping his voice low, "if you're lying, tomorrow's going to be worse." Barrett held his gaze. "If I'm telling the truth, tomorrow will be worse for someone else." A muscle in Harlan's cheek twitched. The cup emptied quickly. The water tasted faintly metallic, like it had traveled through old pipes. Harlan stepped back, closing the slot. The corridor lights dimmed again as the building settled further into night. The young man in the corner eventually slumped sideways, exhaustion overtaking fear. The tattooed man leaned his head against the wall. "You really think you can change anything?" he asked quietly. Barrett stared at the opposite wall where graffiti layered over older graffiti, names scratched into concrete that would outlive the men who wrote them. "I think patterns can be mapped," he said, "and mapped patterns can be dismantled." The tattooed man let out a soft breath. "You talk like a professor?" "No," Barrett replied. Like an engineer. Hours stretched thin. Around 3 in the morning, the precinct grew almost unnaturally quiet. The television in the bullpen shut off with a faint click. The hum of fluorescent lights became the dominant sound, vibrating through the walls. Barrett stood and approached the bars again. "Harlan," he called softly. Footsteps answered after a delay. Harlan appeared, rubbing his eyes. "What?" "My medication is in my wallet," Barrett said calmly. "I have a medical condition. I need it." Harlan frowned. No pills were logged. "They wouldn't have been," Barrett said. "They didn't log most things." A pause. "If you make me check and there's nothing there." "You won't find pills," Barrett interrupted evenly. "You will find something else." Harlan stared at him, suspicion and something else warring behind tired eyes. "What?" "Verification." The word hung between them. Harlan hesitated, then turned and walked away. Inside the cell, the tattooed man shifted upright. "What you doing?" he whispered. Barrett returned to the bench and sat, hands folded loosely in his lap. "Offering someone a choice," he said. The fluorescent light above them buzzed louder for a second, then steadied. Down the corridor, a drawer opened. A wallet snapped shut. Footsteps quickened. When Harlan returned, he wasn't moving slowly anymore. His face had drained of color. He held a piece of plastic between two fingers as if it might burn him. He stopped at the bars, breathing shallow. "Sir," he said quietly. The cell went still. Barrett stood. "Yes, officer." Harlan swallowed hard. "This is real." The word carried more weight than any shout. Behind him, the hallway stretched empty and silent. Barrett's expression did not change. "I know," he said. The machine had just encountered resistance. Harlan's hand trembled slightly as he held the identification up under the corridor light. The fluorescent tube above them flickered, then steadied, casting a flat white sheen across the plastic. He tilted the card once. The holographic seal shifted color beneath the glare. Green softened into amber. A thin thread of red shimmered across the embedded eagle before settling back into gold. Harlan turned it again, slower this time. His thumb brushed over the raised lettering. He felt the textured seal beneath his skin. "This isn't printed," he muttered under his breath. "It's embedded." He glanced over his shoulder. The hallway remained empty. No boots, no voices. Barrett stood quietly behind the bars, orange fabric hanging stiff at his wrists. He did not step closer. "You ran my name under the wrong field," Barrett said evenly. "John Doe won't return federal credentials." Harlan swallowed. He shifted the card closer to his chest, as if shielding it from invisible eyes. "There's a serial number," he said. "I've seen these before, but not this series." "Series 4, Barrett replied. "Updated watermark. 2 months ago." Harlan's gaze snapped up. The detail landed. He hesitated only a second before pulling his personal phone from his pocket. The glow illuminated his face in pale blue. His thumb hovered, then moved quickly across the screen. He entered the credential number. The page loaded slowly over weak signal. A spinning icon reflected in his eyes. Inside the cell, the tattooed man watched silently, sensing the gravity without understanding it. The screen resolved. A formal portrait filled the display. Dark suit, composed expression. Beneath it, a single line of text identifying the office held. Harlan's breath left him in a shallow exhale. He looked up at the man standing behind bars. "You're the director," he whispered. "Yes." Not pride, not threat, just fact. Harlan locked his phone and slipped it back into his pocket. He stared at the key ring at his belt for a long moment. "They're going to destroy this place," he said quietly. "They already did," Barrett replied. "They just didn't realize it." Silence thickened between them. Harlan stepped closer to the bars. "If I open that door," he said, "I'm done here." Barrett met his gaze steadily. "If you don't," he said, "you're part of it." The fluorescent light buzzed again, louder now, as if protesting the tension in the air. Harlan exhaled once, sharp and decisive. He fumbled the keys from his belt. They slipped from his hand and clattered against the concrete, echoing down the corridor. He crouched, retrieved them, and inserted one into the lock. The mechanism clicked open. The cell door creaked outward. The tattooed man stared wide-eyed. The young man in the corner barely stirred. Barrett stepped through the threshold without hesitation. "Phone," he said quietly. Harlan nodded and led him toward the booking desk. The bullpen was dim now, lights lowered to night mode. Computer monitors glowed faintly. The television was dark. Harlan handed him the landline. Barrett lifted the receiver. The dial tone hummed steadily in his ear. He entered a memorized sequence of numbers without looking down. The line connected after 2 rings. "This is Director Kingsley," he said, voice low but firm. "Authorization code Delta 9 Zulu King. Initiate protocol, clean sweep." He listened, eyes fixed on the darkened bullpen. "Yes," he continued. "I am currently detained at Oak Creek Police Department. No, do not deploy tactical units yet. I want the Attorney General notified, Civil Rights Division, and the special agent in charge of Norfolk Field Office." He paused. 800 hours. "Not before. I want the arraignment on record." On the other end, silence. "Yes," he said again. "Let them process me in court." He hung up. The receiver clicked softly back into place. Harlan stood frozen a few feet away. "You're not leaving," Harlan said, realization dawning. "No." Barrett walked back toward the corridor. "You have an open door," Harlan said. "I need the pattern intact," Barrett replied. "The arrest, the booking, the court appearance." He stopped at the cell entrance. "Lock it." Harlan stared at him in disbelief. "You want to go back in?" "The crime isn't finished," Barrett said. "Neither is the evidence." Harlan hesitated, then nodded slowly. He stepped back, closed the heavy door, and turned the key. The lock engaged with a metallic finality. Barrett resumed his place on the bench. "Old." The tattooed man leaned forward. "Who are you really?" he asked. Barrett folded his hands loosely. "I'm the consequence," he said quietly. The corridor returned to silence. Harlan stood outside the bars for a moment longer, staring at the man he had nearly dismissed as another liar. "I didn't know," he said softly. "I know," Barrett replied. Harlan walked away, shoulders tense. Inside the cell, the young man stirred again. "What happens now?" he murmured. Barrett leaned his head back against the cold cinder block wall. "Now," he said, closing his eyes briefly, "we let them finish." In the quiet before dawn, the precinct slept under the illusion of control. Across the country, a different machine had begun to turn. Morning did not arrive gently. It crashed into the corridor with metal doors slamming and voices barking names into the stale air. "John Doe, front." Keys scraped against iron. The cell door swung open. Vance stood there in fresh uniform, coffee in hand, the faint smell of roasted bitterness drifting into the block. Barrett rose without hurry. Chains were fastened around his wrists and waist this time, the metal colder in daylight. 3 other detainees were linked to him in a line. The young man from the corner kept his head down, lips moving silently. They were marched through the rear exit into a gray transport van. The morning air was sharp and clean, dew still clinging to trimmed hedges outside the station. It was almost peaceful. Inside the van, the bench vibrated beneath them as the engine rumbled to life. No one spoke. The chains clinked with every turn. The courthouse loomed ahead 10 minutes later, a squat brick building with tall windows reflecting pale sky. The van backed into a secured garage. The doors opened with a hydraulic hiss. They were unloaded into the basement holding area. The air here carried the scent of dust and old paperwork. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, more stable than the ones at the precinct. Barrett was directed into a small interview booth separated by scratched plexiglass. A thin man in a rumpled suit sat on the other side, flipping through a folder. "All right, John Doe," the man sighed without looking up. "They've got you for obstruction, resisting, and suspected DUI. Breathalyzer marked as refusal. That's automatic license suspension." Barrett remained standing. "My name is Barrett C. Kingsley." The public defender, Mr. Donovan, finally looked up. His eyes were tired, impatient. "Please don't do that," he said. "Judge Caldwell does not enjoy theatrics." "It is not theatrics." Donovan rubbed his temples. "Look, the prosecutor's asking for $5,000 bail. If you plead no contest to obstruction, they'll likely drop the DUI. Time served. Small fine. You're out." "I will not enter a plea." Donovan stared at him. "You want to fight this?" Yes. You'll lose. Barrett held his gaze calmly. I need to appear before the judge. Donovan leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose. You're making this worse for yourself. Am I? The bailiff opened the booth door abruptly. Court's ready. They moved upstairs into the main courtroom. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of spectators waiting for their turn in the system's assembly line. Most faces were drawn tight with worry. Some looked resigned. Judge Lawrence Caldwell sat high above them, heavy-framed and expressionless. A stack of files waited at his right hand. He did not look at the defendants as they were processed one after another. Next, Barrett was guided to the podium. The chains were removed from his waist but not his wrists. The metal cuffs clicked softly against polished wood. The prosecutor, Miss Pierce, stood to one side, reading from a tablet. Case 4492, she said. The State versus John Doe. Barrett leaned slightly toward the microphone. My name is Barrett C. Kingsley, he said clearly. A faint ripple moved through the room. Caldwell did not raise his eyes. The defendant refused identification, Pierce continued. Presented a fraudulent federal credential. It was not fraudulent, Barrett replied. Caldwell's pen stopped moving. Mr. Doe, the judge said, voice heavy and impatient, this court does not entertain delusions. I am not delusional. Officer Ronan is a decorated veteran of this department, Caldwell continued, still not looking directly at him. If he states the identification was false, I am inclined to believe him. From the back of the courtroom, Vance leaned against the wall, smirk intact. Ronan stood beside him, arms folded. I am setting bail at 10,000, Caldwell said, and holding you in contempt for misrepresentation. Barrett did not raise his voice. You may want to check the docket, he said evenly. Or the window. Caldwell's eyes lifted for the first time, irritation flashing. What did you say? The vibration came before the sound. A low tremor traveled through the courtroom floorboards. A faint rattle in the window panes. The water in a paper cup on the clerk's desk rippled slightly. Then came the sound. Distant at first. A rhythmic thrum cutting through morning air. The courtroom grew still. Someone near the back turned toward the windows. The thrum grew louder, accompanied by the deep growl of heavy engines approaching in formation. Ronan's smirk faltered. He shifted his stance, glancing over his shoulder. Caldwell frowned. Bailiff, what is that noise? The doors at the rear of the courtroom burst open. 6 figures entered in dark, tactical gear, bright yellow letters across their chests unmistakable even in peripheral vision. They moved with disciplined precision, spreading along the walls. Behind them walked a woman in a navy suit, posture straight, expression controlled. The room emptied of sound. Judge Caldwell froze, hand still gripping the gavel. This is my courtroom, he snapped, though his voice lacked its earlier certainty. The woman stepped forward. That man, she said calmly, indicating Barrett, is the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The words landed like a physical force. All eyes turned to the figure in the orange jumpsuit. Vance's face drained of color. Ronan's coffee cup slipped from his hand and shattered against the tile floor. Barrett remained still. The bailiff's hands trembled as he unlocked the cuffs. The metal fell away with a final click. Barrett rubbed his wrists once, then turned slowly to face the back of the room. The smirk was gone. He met Ronan's eyes without expression. Then he turned back to the bench. Judge Caldwell, he said evenly. We need to talk. The silence inside the courtroom did not break all at once. It thinned, stretched, and then fractured into whispers that died as quickly as they rose. Agent Valeria Kine stepped forward with deliberate calm. Her heels struck the tile in measured rhythm, each step controlled. Secure the exits, she said without raising her voice. The agents fanned out immediately. Doors were sealed, hallways blocked. The low hum of radios crackled briefly and then fell silent. Judge Caldwell remained standing behind the bench, one hand still hovering over the gavel. His face had lost its color. This is an outrageous disruption of judicial proceedings, he said, though the words sounded hollow even to him. Barrett stepped away from the podium now that the cuffs were gone. The orange fabric hung awkwardly against him, but his posture had shifted. The humiliation no longer clung to him. This is a federal investigation, Barrett said calmly, and this courtroom is now part of the scene. A murmur rippled through the spectators. Ronan took a step back toward the wall, as if distance might protect him. Vance remained frozen, eyes wide, jaw tight. "On what grounds?" Caldwell demanded. Barrett did not look at him immediately. He turned instead toward Kyne. "Read it." Kyne opened a slim folder. The sound of paper sliding against paper was sharp in the quiet room. "Sergeant Patrick Ronan," she began, voice clear and even. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to deprive civil rights under color of law, wire fraud, and racketeering." She shifted her gaze. "Officer Daniel Vance, you are under arrest for the same charges, in addition to falsification of official records." Gasps filled the benches. Kyne lifted her eyes toward the bench. "Judge Lawrence Caldwell, you are under arrest for conspiracy, money laundering, and participation in a racketeering enterprise." The word enterprise lingered like smoke. Caldwell's hand dropped slowly from the gavel. "You have no proof," he said, but his voice trembled. Barrett turned to face him fully now. "We have your booking logs," he said. 500 digital alterations in 12 months, all tied to John Doe entries that never existed. He began to walk toward the center aisle, agents parting slightly to allow him through. "We have financial transfers between your private accounts and a shell entity connected to Fletcher's towing." At the back of the room, a deputy sheriff whispered something into his radio. His hand shook. "We have dash camera footage from Sergeant Ronan's cruiser," Barrett continued, his voice steady, "including the moment he removed unlogged currency from seized property." Ronan's breathing grew audible. "That's not," he began. "Serial numbers were recorded before the stop," Kyne interrupted evenly. "Marked bills." Ronan's shoulders sagged slightly. "And we have text messages," Barrett added. 10 minutes after the arrest. Got a big one. Followed by instructions to prepare a vehicle for auction. The courtroom felt smaller with each word. Caldwell's eyes darted toward the side door, calculating. An agent shifted subtly, blocking the path. "This is political theater," Caldwell said weakly. "No," Barrett replied. "It's procedure." 2 agents moved toward Ronan. He did not resist at first. When the cuffs snapped around his wrists, the sound was loud and unmistakable. Vance stumbled backward as another agent secured his hands. "This is a mistake," Vance muttered. "We were protecting the community." Barrett stopped in front of him. "You were protecting revenue," he said quietly. Vance looked down. Ronan's composure fractured more dramatically. "You set us up," he hissed. Barrett met his eyes. "No," he said. "You ran your standard play." The words landed harder than accusation. Caldwell slowly removed his robe, as if buying time. It slipped from his shoulders and pooled around his feet. Beneath it, he looked smaller. "You can't arrest a sitting judge like this," he said. Kyne stepped forward with a sealed envelope. "We can," she said, "with a signed federal warrant." She handed it to the bailiff, whose hands trembled as he read the document. The seal of the Department of Justice glinted under the overhead lights. Caldwell's breathing quickened. In the gallery, several spectators began to stand, whispering to one another. Some stared at Barrett with disbelief, others with something closer to vindication. Barrett turned slowly, scanning the room. "This investigation began 8 months ago," he said. "Patterns in traffic stops. Asset forfeitures without probable cause. Bail schedules that punished the poor and rewarded the connected." He let the words settle. "Today was a verification." Ronan's face twisted. "You could have told us who you were." Barrett regarded him evenly. "That would have changed your behavior." Ronan had no answer. Agents guided Caldwell down from the bench. The former judge's polished shoes scuffed against the steps as he descended. He avoided eye contact with everyone. The bailiff stepped aside, unsure of where to stand. The shattered remains of Ronan's coffee cup still pooled across the tile floor, brown liquid spreading slowly outward. Barrett paused near the broken ceramic. "You once told someone you'd send a pigeon to the president," he said quietly, not looking at Ronan. Ronan's throat tightened. The eagle came instead. Agents escorted the 3 men toward the rear exit. The doors opened once more, but this time the sound felt final. The courtroom remained in stunned silence. Kyne approached Barrett. "Building secured," she said. "Search teams are already at the precinct." Barrett nodded once. Seal all evidence, he replied. No files leave custody. Outside, the distant thrum of rotors continued to echo across the courthouse square. Inside, the machine had stopped. For the first time in years, Oak Creek was quiet. The interrogation room in Norfolk felt nothing like Oak Creek. The air was cool, filtered, and still. The walls were soundproofed, painted a neutral gray that absorbed emotion rather than reflecting it. A single steel table was bolted to the floor beneath a clean white light that did not flicker. Sergeant Patrick Ronan sat alone in the metal chair. His hands were cuffed in front of him now, resting awkwardly on the table's edge. The swagger had drained from his posture. His mustache, once carefully shaped, seemed to droop with the weight of sweat collecting along his upper lip. He had been sitting there for 2 hours. No clock ticked, no voices echoed, just silence. It was deliberate. The door finally opened with a muted click. Agent Valeria Kine entered first, carrying a slim file. Barrett followed a step behind her, now dressed in a navy suit that fit him with precise simplicity. A small gold pin of the FBI seal caught the light at his lapel. He did not sit. He leaned lightly against the wall near the corner, arms crossed, observing. Kine took the chair opposite Ronan and opened the file. "You have the right to remain silent," she began evenly. "You have the right to an attorney." "I want one," Ronan snapped quickly, his voice cracking. "I want my union rep." "The union is currently under federal subpoena," Kine replied without pause. "You may request counsel. It will not stop this conversation from proceeding under proffer." Ronan's eyes darted to Barrett. "You set me up," he said hoarsely. Barrett did not move from the wall. "No," he replied calmly. "You ran your standard procedure?" Kine slid a photograph across the steel surface. It was a still image from a dash camera, grainy but clear enough. A hand reaching into a wallet, currency visible. Ronan's jaw tightened. "That's not proof," he muttered. "Could be anything." Kine slid another document forward, a typed sheet listing serial numbers. "These bills were recorded prior to the stop," she said. "They were recovered from your locker this morning." Ronan's fingers curled involuntarily. "That's circumstantial." Barrett pushed off the wall and stepped forward slowly. "What about the booking logs?" he asked quietly. 500 alterations, each tied to unverified detainees listed as John Doe. Ronan's breathing grew uneven. "We found the script you used," Kine added. "System down for maintenance. Verification pending." She flipped another page. "And the towing records." A manifest sheet appeared beneath her hand. Vehicle description, timestamp, auction preparation note. Ronan stared at it, color draining from his face. "That's Fletcher's business," he said weakly. "Not mine." Barrett placed both hands flat on the table, leaning slightly forward. 10 minutes after the arrest," he said evenly. "You texted. Got a big one." Kine rotated a printed screenshot toward him. The message glowed black on white. Ronan swallowed. "Coincidence?" Barrett held his gaze. "You cleared traffic lanes on specific nights," he continued. "Tuesdays, Fridays. Stops concentrated near mile marker 88. Ronan's eyes flickered. Ramirez's trucks passed through those windows undisturbed. At the mention of the name, Ronan's composure fractured. "I don't know any Ramirez. He is downstairs," Kine said quietly. "He believes you cooperated." Ronan's head snapped up. "What?" Barrett did not blink. "We placed him in the adjacent holding block," he said. "He's under the impression you gave us the route schedule." "That's not true," Ronan whispered. "He is not known for patience." The room grew colder. Ronan's hands trembled against the cuffs. "You can't put me near him," he said urgently. "You know what he'll do." "Protective custody is reserved for cooperators," Barrett replied. Ronan's breathing quickened. A sheen of sweat formed along his temples. "I was just following orders," he said, desperation creeping in. "Caldwell set the bail structure. Fletcher handled the towing. I just enforced it," Kine finished. Barrett straightened slightly. "You made choices," he said, repeatedly. Ronan's voice broke. "You don't understand what it's like out there." Barrett regarded him with measured calm. "I understand patterns," he said. "And I understand greed." Kine placed one final document on the table. A bank statement, offshore account summary. Numbers circled in red. $1.2 million, she said, deposited across 18 months. Ronan stared at it as though it might disappear if he looked long enough. That's not mine, he murmured. The signature matches your pension file, Kane replied. Silence settled heavily. From somewhere down the hall, a distant door closed. Ronan's shoulders sagged. I didn't start it, he said quietly. But you continued it, Barrett answered. The words carried no anger, just conclusion. Ronan looked up at him then, eyes wide and glassy. If I talk, he said, voice shaking, you keep me away from Ramirez. Barrett held his gaze for several seconds. That depends, he said, on whether you tell the truth. Ronan nodded rapidly. I'll tell you everything, he said. Caldwell skimmed from every bail schedule. Fletcher split the auction profits. Vance logged the false refusals. We rotated shifts so no one caught patterns. Kane began taking notes without looking up. Names spilled from Ronan in uneven bursts. Dates, bank transfers, code words used over text. The machine that once protected him was unraveling through his own mouth. Barrett stepped back toward the wall again, folding his arms. As Ronan's voice grew hoarse, he spoke more quickly, as though speed might buy safety. When he finally paused for breath, the room felt smaller. Kine closed the file. This will be verified, she said. Ronan slumped in the chair, drained. Barrett moved toward the door. As he reached it, he stopped. Greed makes people careless, he said without turning around. Arrogance makes them predictable. He opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Behind him, Ronan began talking again. This time, no one interrupted. The convoy rolled into Oak Creek without sirens. 10 black Suburbans moved in a quiet line, engines low and steady, tires crunching over the same gravel that had once carried patrol cruisers in and out without scrutiny. There were no flashing lights this time, no theatrics, just presence. Inside the precinct, the mood had shifted from routine to containment. Desks were no longer cluttered with half-finished paperwork. Drawers stood open. Filing cabinets were unlocked. The hum of scanners and portable imaging devices replaced idle conversation. Agents in Navy windbreakers moved with precise coordination. Evidence bags snapped open and sealed shut with crisp plastic sounds. Hard drives were disconnected and labeled. Banker boxes filled methodically. Barrett stepped through the double glass doors, jacket buttoned, expression composed. The smell of stale coffee lingered beneath the sharper scent of printer toner and disturbed dust. Uniformed Oak Creek officers stood in small clusters near the far wall. Their weapons had been removed earlier that morning. Their radios sat silent on a cleared desk. They watched, some with anger, some with fear, some with resignation. Barrett moved through the bullpen without raising his voice. His gaze traveled across each workstation, each monitor, each erased note taped beside a keyboard. Image every terminal, he said evenly to Kine as she joined him. Preserve timestamps. Already in progress, she replied. On one desk, a booking ledger lay open. Lines of names. Several marked John Doe, several overwritten. An agent photographed the page before sealing it into an evidence sleeve. Across the room, a technician carefully unplugged the central server tower. A small green light blinked steadily before fading. Chain of custody initiated at 0900 hours, the technician said aloud for the recorder. Barrett nodded once. Near the back corridor that led to the holding cells, Officer Harlan sat alone at a metal desk. His shoulders were tense, his eyes fixed on the surface in front of him. No one stood beside him. When Barrett approached, Harlan rose immediately. Sir, he said quietly. The other officers glanced over, their expressions tightening. You opened the gate, Barrett said, stopping in front of him. Harlan swallowed. Yes, sir. You verified the credential. Yes. Barrett studied him for a moment. In a building that normalized shortcuts, he said. You paused. Harlan did not respond. They will call you a traitor, Barrett continued. They already are. Harlan's jaw tightened. I figured... Barrett reached into his jacket pocket and removed a heavy cream-colored card. The Department of Justice seal was embossed in gold. There is a vacancy in Internal Affairs, he said, for someone who understands what corruption smells like from the inside. Harlan looked at the card but did not take it immediately. My career here is over, he said. This building will not exist in its current form by the end of the week, Barrett replied. Jurisdiction transfers to the county sheriff. Several officers will be suspended pending investigation. Harlan accepted the card slowly. Call that number Monday, Barrett said. Not today. Today you finish your shift. A flicker of something steadier appeared in Harlan's expression. Yes, sir. Barrett turned back toward the center of the bullpen. Listen up, he called, voice carrying clearly without shouting. The room fell silent again. If you accepted bribes, he said, meeting the eyes of a broad-shouldered patrol officer who immediately looked away, we will find the deposits. He shifted his gaze to another. If you altered reports, we will recover the revisions. He let the words settle. And if you stood by while it happened, today is your opportunity to decide which side of this you want to be on. No one spoke. Kiney approached quietly, holding a tablet. We completed the forensic extraction from Ronan's phone, she said under her breath. Text to Fletcher 10 minutes after the arrest. Vehicle described as pristine, marked for auction preparation. Barrett's eyes hardened slightly. Location? He asked. Impound lot off Mercer Road. Vehicle is still listed in holding. Barrett considered this for a moment. We leave it, he said. Kine raised an eyebrow. For how long? One more day. She understood immediately. If Fletcher processed it for auction, if paperwork was generated without court authorization, it would formalize the pattern, not implication, evidence. Have a team document the manifest before and after any status change, Barrett added. Photographs with visible timestamps. Secure the transaction logs. Understood. Across the bullpen, an agent sealed a cardboard box with bright evidence tape. The sound of the tape tearing was sharp and final. Outside, reporters had begun to gather behind temporary barricades. Camera lenses pointed toward the entrance. Barrett stepped toward the doorway but paused briefly, looking back over the room one last time. The desks, the computers, the officers who once believed routine insulated them from consequence. Machines ran on habit. Today, the habit had been interrupted. He walked outside into the afternoon light. The sun had broken through lingering clouds, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Kiney joined him again. Ramirez is confirming payment cycles, she said. Caldwell laundered through shell fines. It's larger than we estimated. Barrett looked toward the distant skyline of Oak Creek, manicured lawns, quiet streets. It usually is, he said softly. He glanced toward the road leading away from town. Prepare a briefing for the governor, he said, and notify the Civil Rights Division. Yes, sir. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and exhaust from idling vehicles. Behind him, agents continued cataloging what had once been hidden in plain sight. The machine had not just been stopped, it was being dismantled. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in Richmond felt heavier than the one in Oak Creek ever had. The air carried the scent of old wood and pressed wool. Every bench was filled. Reporters lined the back wall, notebooks open, cameras silent for now. Victims of traffic stops and asset seizures sat shoulder to shoulder in the gallery, hands folded tightly in their laps. Barrett C. Kingsley took a seat in the last row. He wore a simple gray suit, unremarkable in cut and color. No lapel pin, no entourage. He sat with his back straight, hands resting loosely on his knees. He was not required to be there. He had already testified. The investigation was complete. The evidence had spoken. But he remained. At the defense table sat what was left of the Oak Creek hierarchy. Lawrence Caldwell looked smaller than he had on the bench months earlier. His shoulders curved inward. The commanding presence had evaporated. His eyes avoided the gallery. Beside him, Patrick Ronan shifted constantly in his chair. The mustache was gone. His hands, cuffed loosely in front of him, trembled as they rested against the table's edge. Officer Vance was not present. He had entered a plea agreement early in the process, his testimony recorded and admitted into evidence. His sentence had already been handed down. The bailiff called the room to order. All rose. The federal judge entered with steady steps, robe falling neatly around her shoulders. She did not shuffle papers. She did not clear her throat. She looked directly at the defendants. Be seated. The room obeyed. She began with Caldwell. "You were entrusted with the impartial administration of justice," she said, voice calm but firm. "Instead, you used your authority to create a revenue scheme that preyed upon those least able to defend themselves." Caldwell's hands tightened around the edge of the table. The evidence demonstrates repeated acts of fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering conducted over a sustained period. A pause. "On the charges of racketeering and deprivation of rights under color of law, this court finds you guilty." The word echoed. "I sentence you to 30 years in federal custody without the possibility of parole." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the gallery. Caldwell's face went pale. His shoulders sagged. He did not look at anyone as marshals stepped forward and placed firm hands on his arms. "Stand." He rose slowly. Ronan's breathing grew louder. "Sergeant Patrick Ronan," the judge continued, shifting her gaze. "You participated knowingly in a pattern of civil rights violations, extortion, and obstruction of justice." Ronan swallowed hard. "You abused your badge for personal gain." His lips trembled. "I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison." Ronan's knees buckled slightly. The marshals tightened their grip to keep him upright. A quiet sob escaped him. As they turned him toward the side exit, his eyes lifted involuntarily. They locked onto Barrett. For a brief moment, the noise of the courtroom faded. Ronan's expression carried not anger now, but comprehension. The rainy highway, the flashing lights, the laughter. Barrett did not smile. He did not nod. He simply held the gaze. Then Ronan was led away. The heavy courtroom door shut with a solid, resonant click. The judge concluded the remaining procedural matters quickly. The gallery remained subdued, absorbing the finality of it all. When the session adjourned, conversations resumed in hushed tones. Reporters moved quickly toward the front. Barrett stood and slipped out a side aisle before microphones could find him. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright against the courthouse steps. The air felt clearer, cooler than the tension inside. A black government sedan waited at the curb. Leaning against the hood stood Harlan, no longer in a patrol uniform. He wore a fitted suit now, still adjusting to its weight. A trainee badge clipped neatly inside his jacket. He straightened as Barrett approached. "Did they get what they deserved?" Harlan asked quietly. Barrett paused before answering. "They got the law," he said. Harlan nodded slowly. "Where to now, sir?" Barrett glanced at his phone. A notification glowed on the screen. A rural county in Alabama had flagged unusual patterns in asset forfeiture reports. Out-of-state drivers. Seized cash, minimal charges filed. The pattern was familiar. He slid into the back seat of the sedan. "Alabama," he said. Harlan moved to the driver's side and started the engine. "Rental or bureau vehicle?" Harlan asked, almost cautiously. Barrett looked out the window as the courthouse steps receded behind them. "Rental," he replied. "Something ordinary." The car merged into traffic. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Barrett added quietly, almost to himself, "Make sure the tail light is out." Harlan glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Just a little?" he asked. "Just enough," Barrett said. The sedan disappeared into the flow of afternoon vehicles, indistinguishable from any other. Another quiet road waited somewhere ahead. A badge should be a shield, unless someone forgets what it stands for.